Hi, I'm Rick, and this video is about the misconceptions surrounding the Quartzsite Rock Alignment, also known as the Lost Pilot Rock Sign. Now, everything you've heard about it is wrong. This will set the record straight about the rock alignment's original use. Some of you may have seen it, or at least heard of it, and that's why you're here. If not, this is what it looks like. The rocks were originally painted silver, with the letters being 13 feet high by 250 feet long and having an arrow pointing towards the town of Quartzsite, Arizona. It's located about 10.5 miles northeast of Quartzsite, just off the Plumosa Road. So, again, the question is, why was this made? Most of you have probably heard various reasons as to why it was made. You've seen the YouTube videos and read the travel blogs where the person states it was made by so-and-so with nothing to back up their statements. Unfortunately, they're just repeating wrong information they previously read on a website or saw in a YouTube video without doing any research themselves, so this bad information continues to get passed along. One theory is that it was built during World War II by Patton's troops as a reference point to military planes flying in the area. Well, Quartzsite was within Patton's Desert Training Center's boundaries, and there was a heavy bomber base nearby at Blythe. But military aircraft flew high and fast. Even with those letters being 13 feet tall, they were too small to be seen at higher altitudes, as it would be just a blur, so it wasn't built for them. Another theory is that it was for people flying out of Quartzsite during the war, so let's touch on that. Buck Connor was an early film actor who built a home in Quartzsite prior to World War I. He was one of the first people in the area to get a pilot's license and wanted somewhere to fly out of, so he built himself an airfield on his property and called it Connor Field. Now, at the outbreak of World War II, general aviation flying was restricted to 150 miles inland of the West Coast. Because of this, Connor Field was now one of the places you were still able to fly. Flying and pilot training increased at the airfield, with pilots keeping up their hours and students looking to get their licenses. As you can see here, Bob Cummings and Ray Milland were two of the pilots keeping up their flying hours. Later, the Army contracted with Buck to use this airfield in training women to get their pilot's license to become future Women Air Force Service Pilots, or WASPs. The WASP program gave some 1,100 civilian women non-combat military flight duties during World War II, such as transporting military aircraft, towing targets, and cargo transport. Those women and other students at Connor Field trained in an interstate cadet or similar type aircraft. These small planes flew low and slow. Pilots would be able to see that rock alignment. So, was a Quartzsite rock alignment built for the pilots flying from Connor Field? Well, there's some more to uncover. Back to the rock alignment. What does it tell us? The direction of north for navigation, that an airfield is nearby. The key point here, the name of that airfield, and the direction to that airfield with the number of miles. From all this, we know that the alignment should point to an airfield named Quartzsite, but during the war, there was no airfield by that name. The only airfield in town at that point in time was Connor Field, as shown here. Quick note, this is from a pilot sectional chart, which is basically an air map for pilots and will be used for other examples. But now we have to go back even further in time. In the early 20s, cross-country flights were in their infancy. The planes were unreliable and navigation was marginal. Because of this, the post office directed that air routes be laid out for planes to follow so as not to get lost. These routes were marked by concrete arrows on the ground, flashing beacons, writing on buildings, and other types of markings. Along these routes were smaller airfields in case the pilots had to make an emergency landing. All these airfields were listed in books printed by the Commerce Department for pilots. This one is from 1931. Most of these auxiliary airfields had no services. It was just a place a pilot could safely land if needed. Looking at some early sectionals, I found that there were once two airfields in Quartzsite in the late 20s to 30s, Connor and Quartzsite. Quartzsite Airfield was located south of Main Street and east of the 95. It was for the cross-country pilots and listed in the 1931 General Airway Information Booklet as such. Here's a picture of where the two fields were in 1939 and one of now. If you were to follow the Quartzsite alignment arrow for 11 miles, the endpoint is around here. A bit off course by my calculations, but close enough to find the landing field, especially since it had green blinker lights on it. After 1938, Quartzsite Field was dropped from the sectionals. Only Connor Field was listed. Since aircraft and navigation had improved by this time, Quartzsite Airfield was abandoned and reverted back to desert. Now the Quartzsite alignment points towards a town, but not to an airfield named Quartzsite. On later sectionals, Connor Field's name is changed to Quartzsite Field. Now the rock alignment once again points in the general direction to an airfield named Quartzsite. I don't know when the new Quartzsite Field was dropped from sectionals, but on this 2021 sectional, no airfields are shown for this area. It's important to remember that for this particular area and possibly others, the rock alignments pointed to airfields named after the nearest town, and not to the town itself. Another example of this is for the Vicksburg Airfield. The Quartzsite alignment points towards the Quartzsite Airfield, which happens to be in the town of Quartzsite. You'd think the same thing for the Vicksburg alignment, that it would point to an airfield in the town of Vicksburg, but it doesn't. If you follow that arrow direction for 12 miles, it actually points to this point here, 6 miles from Vicksburg. That's because this is where a landing field was built, but named after the closest town. Remember, the rock alignments don't point towards towns, but towards an airfield named after the nearest town. Lastly, another example of this is for the Siloam Airfield. It was located some 14 miles from the town. So, the Quartzsite alignment was originally built for early cross-country pilots and pointed to an airfield named Quartzsite that happened to be in the town of Quartzsite. I hope you enjoyed this, and on to my next misconception video.